Jose Saramago, author of Blindness, writes a story of how a doctor and his wife and their society handle the blindness epidemic that destroys their society on different levels. Saramago takes normal, everyday people who are blind in character and makes them physically blind. This blindness is a contagious disease that spreads among all people except for the doctor's wife. The significance behind this is Saramago making a point that people who are blind don't realize how blind they are until they are tested with a life-changing situation. As for the doctor's wife, she is not blind in character to start with, which is why the author chose to keep her sealed. At the end of the story, the doctor's wife says, "Yes, I don't think we did go blind. I think we are blind. Blind but see. Blind people who can see but do not see." The doctor's wife understands this idea from the beginning that blindness in her society was making people's blindness as a character flaw, a public thing, which is purposeful by Saramago because sometimes society can be so corrupt that people's faults are not recognized because the majority of the population have those faults. Thus faults become normal in society. This is an example of Saramago's comment. On today's society of corrupt humans. Stylistically speaking, Saramago, in a way, makes the characters appear less human than they actually are. One way he does this is by removing quotations when the characters talk. The book progressively dehumanizes the characters when the blind are quarantined in the wards by the government. The government has taken away a lot of the rights from the characters, and in a way, Saramago's choice of not using quotes makes the characters lose their voice and sense of individuality. To add to this, Saramago does not give any of the characters names, and this makes the characters seem even more unidentifiable to us, the readers. The lack of names helps bring out Saramago's intention of criticizing our blind society by focusing on his message of blindness being a character flaw that is hard to identify. Saramago's long sentence structure also adds to the idea of ranting or venting about specific situations throughout the book that adds to Saramago's purpose of making our widely accepted society unacceptable in a light we haven't seen before, and making us, the readers, think about how blind our government, our friends, our enemies, and even our own selves are.
Welcome, Julianne. Can you please explain to us this painting that is right behind you?
So this painting by Roy Natrum criticizes people's inability to judge themselves and they're oblivious to their own flaws. When you look at the painting, your eyes are immediately drawn to the crown.
Why does the crown sit on the gorilla's head?
So not only is it the center of the canvas and the most important aspect of the composition, its red gemstones are also the only source of color in the painting. It's obvious that Natrum desires this to be the central focus of the painting, and that it is intended to be the most important symbol in the painting.
What does the crown symbolize?
So the crown serves as a blindfold to the gorilla, and that's apparent as you see how it sits not on the gorilla's head, but over his eyes. I believe this is intended to show the wealth and power symbolized by the crown blind leaders to their own deficits. In this case, that he is not a man, but a gorilla.
Have you read the book Blindness by Jose Saramago?
Yes, and this concept actually reflects the downfall of the government in blindness. Like the gorilla in the painting, the government's prestige, power, and fear blinds itself to its own cruelty. Though like the gorilla, they can physically see, they are blind to the fact that they are wrongly treating the blind people like menacing animals.
What is special about the blurred outlines of the gorilla?
So this idea of being blind to one's own flaws is further developed in the painting through the use of the blurred outlines of the gorilla and the balloon. This blurriness evokes a feeling of uncertainty. The gorilla changes his stance often and is thus unpredictable. This symbolizes how, as a leader, he cannot always be trusted to do what is right and necessary because he changes his ideas frequently and seemingly at random. The darkness of the gorilla and the balloon also contribute to this effect.
How does this relate to the government in Blindness?
So similarly, in Blindness, the government frequently changes its stance in the epidemic, leading to instability, but the doctor's wife, as a contrast, is always guided by the same moral compass, so her actions are predictable. The government's character flaw in this case is that it is blind to any set of moral or ethical values, so its actions are unpredictable.
What are those little specks in the background of the painting?
So that's the most subtle, but arguably the most powerful aspect of this painting, and that's the use of Braille in the background. So this is a detail that can easily be overlooked by a sighted person, similar to how many people forget to look inward and evaluate their own weaknesses.
Have you deciphered the Braille?
The message inside the Braille is also very important, and it's no one ever eyes himself or listens to his own voice. It is very important that Natural includes this message in Braille, because it demonstrates how it is blindness in spirit, not in the eyes, that prevents one from learning from the painting's message.
Dab. Hello everybody, I'm with Nadia Mohideen, a critic from New York. Hello Nadia, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Nora. How are you?
I'm good. So when I first emailed you, I wanted you to somehow find a movie that you found related to Blindness by Jose Saramago. What came to mind when you first thought V for Vendetta is the movie?
Well, the reason why I chose V for Vendetta is because, unlike Blindness, which is a novel that deals with literal blindness where there's an epidemic and no one can see and they have this milky whiteness, V for Vendetta deals more with a figurative blindness where, though none of the characters are actually able to not see, they all have the power to see, they end up being blinded in the end of the movie by the main character V, who seems to control everyone in the population.
So do you see any type of similarity or difference between V, the main character, and any character from Blindness?
Yeah, I think that V most closely emulates the character of the doctor's wife in Blindness, because they're both two very similar characters who have a similar role, such as V has this power that he's controlling everyone. He's fooling the government, he's fooling all the security agencies, no one can figure out who he is, and the doctor's wife has this power that she is the only person who's able to see. However, they both use it in two drastically different ways. The doctor's wife attempts to use her sight, gift of sight, in order to save the population and save her husband, but in turn she ends up killing some people unintentionally, versus V has his power over the entire government, he has them all under his wing, and he uses that to his advantage to kill about 90% of the characters, which is generally a bad thing.
So there's just a difference of intentions.
Mm-hmm.
My last question is, how do the two works of art relate stylistically speaking?
Well, the tone that's created by Jose Saramago in his book is very ominous, and that's because he doesn't use, first of all, he doesn't use any actual names for the characters. He just uses descriptive qualities such as the girl with the dark glasses, the boy with conjunctivitis, and also when he writes, he doesn't use any quotation marks to signal that the characters are talking, so it kind of creates this tone of, oh, what's going on? You have to try to keep up with it, which is really similar to V for Vendetta, because they use a lot of backlighting to create this really dark look constantly throughout the entire movie, especially in those scenes where V is killing. It makes it seem very ominous.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadia.
Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm with Mr. Brannigan, a professor who has criticized the poem I Stood Musing in a Black World by Stephen Crane. Mr. Brannigan, how does Stephen Crane criticize this poem, and what does he do to criticize it?
Okay, so in this poem, Stephen Crane criticizes people's inability to trust their own insights, as well as their willingness to simply follow others blindly. Crane uses short and choppy phrases throughout the entire poem, which adds a simplistic element to the way it's read and eliminates any fluff from taking away from the main purpose of the story.
From whose perspective is the poem told from?
It's told from the perspective of the narrator, who is not physically blind, but is blind in the sense that he lacks his own insight. This characterization is apparent in the first few lines of the poem, which read, "I stood musing in a black world, not knowing where to direct my feet." Instead of following his own conscience, he decides to blindly listen to and follow the voices.
How is the narrator similar to the people in Blindness by Jose Saramago?
This narrator is similar to the people in Jose Saramago's Blindness, who lack a strong moral compass or choose to blindly adhere to their societal norms. These character flaws act as a sort of blindness, and they ultimately lead to the people's loss of physical sight.
Who are the voices in the poem, and what do they represent?
Okay, so the voices in the poem represent the greedy and impatient side of society as a whole, and they are similar to the narrator, blind in a sense as well. The voices are described as being a stream of men that are quick and ceaseless. These adjectives contain an urgent tone, which attests to their impatience. Additionally, they're eager and they're filled with desire, which serves as evidence of their greediness.
What is the main problem in the poem?
The main problem of the poem is the narrator's uncertainty with himself, which causes him to turn away from his own insights, and especially when these voices repeatedly yell, "Look, look there," throughout the poem. Crane's repeated use of this shadow, of these phrases shows how the narrator feels increasingly compelled to listen to and heed their commands instead of trusting his own conscience. When he chooses to look in the direction of their pointing, he sees a vision painted upon a pall that is described as being radiant, ineffable, and divine. These adjectives give this vision a very grandiose image, which is ironic because it is painted upon a pall, which is a cloth that is spread over a coffin or tomb. I believe that this ironic image shows that the greedy and impatient qualities of the voices will only lead them to their own demise. And if the character chooses to follow the voices, his blindness will lead him to the same fate. This concept reflects the way in which the people in blindness were headed toward a very similar fate. In the asylum where the blind people were placed by the government, a very violent regime eventually took control using fear tactics and subjugated the rest of the internees to cruel and inhumane treatment. If this sort of reckless and primal behavior created by the regime had spread throughout the rest of the blind people, then their whole society would have fallen into chaos, and very few would have survived in the end. And then at the end of the poem, the narrator briefly looks away from the vision, and when he looks back, there's nothing there anymore. At this point, he is still unable to trust himself and falls into despair. When he asks the voices once more where to look, they yell, "Fool, fool, fool." And Crane's decision to make the voices' dialogue so simple and identical throughout the entirety of the poem allows these final words to emphasize the narrator's moment of realization. It takes the narrator up until the very end of the poem to figure out that the blindness of his spirit has caused him to nearly lose his own identity and become a part of the voices himself.